quickly talk about part 3, chapters 11 and 12, just because we didn't last week. So I want to make sure if you guys had anything to say on that, then we can, and then we will roll right into part 4, chapters 1 through 9. All right, so chapter 11, the movies do it, TVs do it. Why don't you do it? Make it dramatic. So in this chapter, they are talking about how it really kind of is talking about marketing, but how when they're trying to make a point, they do it by making a physical example, right? The soap commercials, they wash the clothes in the soap, and then of course the other bottle looks like the competitor's brand, but doesn't say it's the competitor's brand, but works, a lot worse. And their brand is cleaning it or whatever. So how do you think this affects people when you're trying to get them on your side? Like, this to me is a very good negotiating tactic. And I tried to use it this week. It failed miserably. This lady was like, hey, listen, no one in this area is paying closing costs. We asked for closing costs. And, everybody in this area is getting almost list price. Well, I went and pulled the numbers, and the numbers were actually that they were getting 96% of list price, and my offer was actually netting her 97% even with the closing cost, and 70% of sellers were paying closing costs. So I kind of wrote all that out and explained it in an email, and I failed. But I do think it can work in situations, right? I think that if it doesn't work immediately, it potentially plants a seed. So I'm hoping we get a call in a couple weeks.
Wow.
Yeah. So what did you guys think about this chapter? We'll talk on it just quickly so we can kind of move on to section 3.
This is the type of stuff that I'm not like good at doing unless I guess I'm instructed to do so. Because it's like it makes me think of, I don't know if you guys have gone to like, meetups or any of those like in person like seminars where they kind of talk about something, whether it's a program or whatever, and there's so much hype kind of going on. That's kind of what I think about when he talks about like, the movies do it, TV does it, why don't you? Like he's kind of talking about a lot of different things where they're almost basically just dramatizing stuff, which kind of goes to our human nature of, I mean, if you're not going to dramatize it, we're just going to get bored, and stop paying attention. And by the time you're done talking, we're like, I don't remember what you said, can you go through it again, But yeah, I don't know. I'm not the greatest at that just because I've never liked it. I've always just been like, guys, you could have just sat me down and talked to me. I won't fall asleep, but it is what it is. So, but it's effective. I mean, if used well, especially the way he talks about it in the book. I love the examples he goes through.
Yeah, I kind of agree. It's not something we use often. I felt like he used a lot of examples that were advertisements, and the only one that was real life was the proposal example, right? Like getting down on one knee. Awesome. So on to chapter 12 in section 3, nothing else works. This was the chapter where he talks about a lot of effective leaders were kind of pushed in this direction with this tactic, I guess. And so it talks about in this chapter pushing people with a challenge, right? So maybe they don't want to do it, but the challenge makes them excited to do it. A little bit. And what do you guys think about this chapter?
I feel like this is a necessary skill, this principle that he's talking about. This is a necessary skill, especially when you're doing like nonprofit or volunteer work, because a lot of the times, the only benefit you're really getting is just overall like mission that everybody's kind of going towards, but everybody else has lives, everybody else has jobs, everybody else has other like priorities. So you almost kind of have to spin things certain ways to get them to almost want to do it or almost feel like it's their idea, almost becoming like a steward of it. It's really I feel like it's necessary when volunteering or directing volunteers. Um, Before that, I mean, sometimes you can kind of hide behind the title, right? And then from there, you can kind of delegate things, but then people aren't really wanting to do it. They're just like, oh, I get paid, right? This guy's a dick, but I get paid. So, but it doesn't work like that for volunteers. So, um, yeah, honestly, I appreciate this chapter because I've been doing a little bit of volunteering. So it's like, how do you get people to do something and then also be like, I know you have other things to do, but you got to do this too. So,
Yeah, you gotta drive people's competitive nature. Um, when I lived back in Illinois, I was a it was funny. I found it on meetup.com too, but part of a women's group, and we would raise money every year, had a huge fundraiser. And I think it was my second year of being part of the group, and I was the leader of the big fundraiser. And so the competitive nature was to, break a new record. And we did it like by over 20%. We broke the prior year's record, and it was a huge accomplishment and very time consuming, but yeah, it definitely drove that competitive nature too. And everyone within it, because they all wanted to set that new record. So it was neat when all these ladies had full-time jobs, but still.
right, that's awesome. Congrats to y'all
Well, thank you.
breaking records and shit.
Feels good.
Well, he talks about in this chapter that pay usually doesn't motivate people. It's the challenge that motivates people. And that kind of made me think about, if you study the DISC, why putting somebody in their right position and utilizing their natural skills at a high level is so important. It was like, I think I've always realized that, but this was one of those moments where it was like an aha moment. It was like, oh, makes sense, All right, on to anything else on chapter or section 3 before we kind of scoot out of that one? No. I just want to make sure we have time to chat about section 4. I think it was my favorite section,
Yeah.
but I like the idea of being a leader, so I think it appealed to my inner self a ton. All right, if you must find fault, this is the way to begin. So this is something that we've actually talked about before in Scouts. We called it a shit sandwich. Something good in the front, in the middle, the bad news, and then follow it up with something good. This book doesn't really, or at least this section doesn't really talk about good, bad, then good. But I think there's a lot of value when you do have to tell somebody something bad. On my call this morning, Chris was talking about having to present an offer that is less than desirable. And he was kind of, coaching me a little bit on how to have those conversations, because I presented one and I was a little frustrated that the agent was so butthurt about the offer. It always shocks me when people are so involved emotionally with their clients and their contracts, because I'm not. Like, it's very separated in my head. And so he was saying, yeah, just go in and just be friends with the agent and be like, yeah, I understand, and you're right, and like, my client's been looking at this and blah blah blah, and just kind of, you know see it from their position, but start with something that they can feel really good about.
Was this the chapter when he talked about you say something good and then you follow up with the but? Okay, so that is
Yeah.
something that I am definitely going to take away from this chapter is the but versus and try using that in my conversations of giving people feedback and beginning with that positive feedback and then follow with and if you continue to work this hard on this subject, be just as good and you'll kill it at the end of this year or whatever it might be.
It's something you can use all the time. It's I don't think that was this chapter, but I'm looking right now because I made that note. But it is very comparable in this chapter.
It's funny that there are different names for it. I've always called it a compliment sandwich because it, there's always some bad news to deliver in doing, like, CPA work. So it's like, as soon as I see it, I'm like, you know what, we're just gonna go ahead, we're just gonna do it. I have the same system every time. all right, what's working really well? Let's start with that. And then I'll kind of transition right into, all right, now here's the kicker, and you kind of give them the news, and then you kind of end it up with, I think if we get this taken care of and kind of draw out the steps, this will kind of bring you back to that, it'll kind of get rid of this, or it'll kind of tie this up, or whatever it is. And then from there, I feel like it works really well, almost to the way that he explains it, because it's like as soon as you come in and you almost kind of compliment, almost really showing that you went through and kind of like looked through everything, right? Actually got a feeling for it, and took an interest in it to know, okay, well, this is actually really good in your systems, and it might be something that they're pretty prideful about. So by the time they hear that, the rest of it, they're like, okay, well, I mean, what do we do? And before they even ask it, I've already told them. So, it generally works well.
It's such a good, strong, powerful tool. And Natalie, you kind of geared us up for the next chapter. It is actually chapter number 2, how to criticize and not be hated. Don't use but. It makes you question the compliment. You did a good job, but you did whatever, and replace it with and. So this is something that they taught us at a super high level in Bold, which is it's a marketing class for KW. And so they actually had us wear a rubber band around our wrist. And anytime we use the word but, we were supposed to snap ourselves and replace it with and.
Oh, wow.
Because anytime you use the word but, even if it doesn't totally make sense in your brain, the word and does make sense. And even if the but is not being negative, you're the best kid ever, but I love you more. The but still is negative, right? Everybody's brain goes straight to negative, to where you're the best kid ever and I love you more even feels better than that but.
Mm-hmm.
And so in Bold, they actually teach us at a super high level. Like they do not want that in your vocabulary at all. It just gives a good point on the back end. So that was a very nice cue in that.
Wasn't there another word that you learned that you're not supposed to use also?
You're not supposed to use I.
Oh.
I know that's a word that you're not supposed to use.
The I'm sorry, but makes me think of, and it made me think of this all through the chapter. There's a TV show that Lexi and I watch. It's like a trash reality TV show. And so it's called Vanderpump Rules. It's about a California restaurant. And so one of the characters has like this really pretty wife, owns half of a restaurant, and then cheats on his, well, not really his wife, but kind of longtime partner. And so he's kind of the master of I'm sorry, but, because you don't ever notice him saying it, because he's, after a while, and it's funny because you can kind of watch the TV shows and the seasons, and you can see he actually replaces but with anything else. Like he uses and every so often, and sometimes he'll just pause, and then he'll kind of go into whatever his but is. And it's like you'll kind of see how he uses it in a bit of a manipulative way. It almost really kind of emphasizes power just behind like replacing the word but, because it in itself, I think, takes the sincerity out of an apology. So if you just say anything else, it's almost like the sincerity is still there, and you're getting your point out.
Look at you, already using it.
Right. So, but yeah, I mean, it just made me kind of think of that. It's a bit manipulative in some instances, but he's not using it like that in this book at all, so it can be used very productively.
Well, I think that's the beauty of the book, is all the tactics are manipulative, all of them.
Exactly.
Like at the end of the day, it's 100% manipulating the situation. It's just manipulating it in a way that the other person is on the offense instead of the defense, which in any business situation is where you want the other side.
Right.
Really, in any relationship is where you want the other side. Some of these tactics are things that I learned in scouting. And when I started using them with my kids, our relationship shifted greatly. And it's funny because my ex-husband knows the other side of the fence me and always assumes that's the me that's always going to come out. And so
Right.
it's, to your point, David, I can take and manipulate that situation. If I'm in a good mood, I use these tactics. If I feel like fighting, well, he's fun to fight with. And the old me just comes out, and it's comical because I can make it move in any direction I want it to with this. And I think it works on most people because 80% of people don't know this kind of stuff, right? You think about how it worked at a super high level back in Dale Carnegie's time frame. Well, it probably doesn't work quite at the level it works for us in business because so many more people now know and understand these tactics and use them.
Right. Right.
Because
Yeah,
if somebody,
and, I mean, just think about how long this book has been actually published. How many people, like a percentage of people, actually read it. It's like, to your point, over time now, I think that knowledge just kind of started to build up. So you start to read some other books that we also read and that kind of find you other little ways to kind of, how that's evolved now into now's time. But I mean, to your point, yeah, a lot of people aren't even really paying attention to this stuff at all.
Chapter 3, talk about your own mistakes first. So I think this is something super useful when you are de-escalating a situation, for sure. I think that when you go in and you're like, hey, here's what I did. I really suck, but so do you, and so do you. I think that presentation is much more well received by the other party than that immediate, you're awful. And this is another one that I think is awesome with kids, especially while they're little.
Yeah, because I feel like it's de-escalating, like almost immediately. I feel like anytime confrontation or an argument or any kind of even just a discussion, a little loud, I feel like the immediate thought is, well, I'm being attacked, but I feel like that immediate disarm of, oh, whoops, I did this wrong. We got to talk about this now. It's like, oh, well, I'm not being attacked. It's almost like they're trying to work with me. Like they broke it. Now they need my help. It's less of an attack at that point. So I think it's a huge de-escalation. So I don't know. I imagine it would be fantastic for kids. They're not aware of it yet.
Well, it definitely takes the edge off of, commenting on somebody, trying to correct somebody, coming into the conversation where, listen, nobody's perfect. I screwed up all this time, right? Here's all the things that I did wrong, and almost kind of leading them to the well of, yeah, we all make mistakes. I did this one too. I made a mistake here, right? Almost convincing them to acknowledge the mistake in their own head before you even bring it up to them. Right now, so no, he's right. Oh, yeah, you're right. I did kind of screw that one up. You're exactly right. I was just thinking the same thing, right? Not because you told them to do it, because you kind of said, oh, here's how I kind of screwed up. And then all of a sudden, in the back of their head, they're like, I did that same shit. I messed up also. And then you're like, oh, so moving forward, let's kind of maybe work together on having a better outcome. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, you're right. I know I kind of did the same thing you did. Let's improve it together. Now we're kind of a collective doing something, and it's a little bit less disarming, a little less confrontational. Like, oh, you did something wrong. Well, I did something wrong. Well, so did you. Right? I mean, that's kind of everybody's defensive. Well, what about you? Well, you did this. Well, you did it too, right? Okay, yeah. So kind of coming right into the play, saying, hey, here's all the things that I screwed up. All of a sudden, is a little bit less antagonistic to bring someone else's fault on. But again, I think it's really what you're almost making them do is acknowledge their own faults in their own head. So when you bring it up, they're like, I know that already. Yeah, you're right. It's a little bit less harsh.
Mm-hmm. And I think for kids, breaking the rules is scary enough. And so having to admit that they broke them, it stops, it just creates a circle of trust, if you will. Awesome. We will move on. I'm kind of moving quickly, so I don't want to end a few chapters shy again today. So if I move too quick, just say, hey, I would like to say this. So number 4, no one likes to take orders. I love this question. What do you think about this? Giving somebody that ownership in a situation and in a decision makes it so much more real for them and makes it their idea. And a lot of times I think a lot of people want to have ownership, but don't necessarily have an idea. So they're happy to take yours.
Mm-hmm.
And he also goes on to say that when you ask a question, it stimulates creativity in people. So even if they don't have an idea, at least it kind of gets the juices flowing a little bit as they're thinking through whatever situation it is you're trying to guide them down or encourage them to, make the right decision, whatever that looks like. That'll kind of help them as far as movement in their brain.
Right. He had the example of, I forget who it was that they were admiring, but that he asked one of his advisors. He said, "Yeah, the guy never gave anyone orders. He only asked them questions," and that was like very inspiring. I'm sure it really helped get people to where they want to be. And I mean, what a technique! Because like reading through some of your past emails, you can see where you didn't inspire them, you told them what to do, and maybe there's some opportunity there for myself to ask questions to get to the solution versus.
Yes, no, I totally agree. That was something that I kind of thought of too, Natalie, while we were reading it. It was like, oh, totally always asking questions. Because I know that sometimes I am piss poor at asking questions and I am very good at demands.
They come so natural.
Well, it just seems, I think sometimes it seems easier in your head to just demand, and that coming up with the right questions and the right guidance is harder and takes longer, but I think it's probably actually just the opposite.
Long term, much better solution.
I think the long-term solution is more favorable to what you are looking to achieve if you go in with a better attitude. All right, chapter 5. Let the other person save face. When someone's wrong, pointing out probably not the best decision. This chapter was kind of short. I think it was like 5 or 6 minutes. I know we're kind of running low on time. But anyway, what did you guys think about this chapter? Is this something that you think could be useful in relationships?
100%.
Absolutely.
Sure, absolutely.
I agree.
Speaking of saving face, I'm going to save my own face. I'm sorry, I have a 1 o'clock that I gotta hop on to. So apologize. I know I will have the book out to the group text and with the selection. I'm kind of mulling over between 2 different things. I had a book that I kind of thought that I wanted to do, but then with the baby conversation, I kind of may change it to something else. Now, it's still going to be kind of a resource book, obviously, that we may be doing, but it may be more of a family twist to it, if you will. It's a couple of ideas that popped in my head that may help for as people are expanding their families, whether it be grandkid wise or being kid wise. So anyway, I'm gonna shut up. I will have all that information out, everybody. I appreciate your patience, but we'll have that out by the end of the day.
Thanks, Craig.
Thank you.
Bye, love you.
Love you too. Night.
All right, so on to chapter 6. I actually really liked this chapter. It's probably the one I took the most notes on, and it's how to spur people to success. Train people like we train dogs.
Mhm.
How often are we jerks and we demand, and then we think, it's better to train an animal with treats and kindness and love and praise, yet we train, we train people so differently. And he talks about in this chapter how the kids start like throwing fits and stuff like that. And I really believe it's because at a young age, that's how we train our kids to behave. as a parent, we ignore until the kid starts getting crazy. Then we stop and deal with them. And whether we deal with them in a nice manner or an ugly manner, they still get our attention, which is the goal. And, you know, we then wonder why we raise these little assholes. Well, it's because that's how we train them. They were babies. They understood a lot more than what we gave them credit for understanding. And so I really like this chapter because I think this chapter is something we all can work at a high level on, and training people with praise. And is something I do at home at a high level with the kids, especially with 2 kids with learning disabilities. When I focus on the things that they do well and we praise those things and then use that into kind of how they can move it into whatever they're struggling with, I see such a huge difference.
Yeah, that was a good chapter. Was that the one where he talked about, I think the family where they started giving the kids so much praise that they actually went above and beyond and didn't ask, and they did more than what they even wanted them to do, and they kind of tapered off, but yeah, that was a really good example.
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like so my dogs, the things that kind of bother me about them is usually something that they're doing to try and get my attention. So, like, you know, one of them wants to play fetch. And so she'll whine and make a noise. And when she whines and make that noise, I'm like, oh my God, leave me alone. And I'll grab the ball and throw it, not realizing I'm like training her to do that. She's like, oh, that's how I get him to do it.
Yeah.
You know, so I imagine, you know, kids will probably be doing the same thing. So pay attention to that one.
Nip that in the
It's
bud.
funny, a lot of these books, y'all were joking about reading parenting books, but so many of these books, it's not
about
just about
parenting.
business relationships, it's about all the relationships. You know, the
Mhm.
next chapter goes on, give a dog a good name. And they tell the story in this chapter about the little boy, Tommy T, who was kind of an a-hole, kindergarten through 3rd grade, and he makes it up to Miss whomever's 4th grade class. And so when he walks in, you know, his good name is natural born leader. Hey, Tommy, I know you're a natural born leader, and I can't wait to see how you do a great job showing the class how to behave, because I know you have it in you. And so it's kind of a, you know, it kind of, all of these books just kind of roll into
Such a seamless way of building stewardship. Just getting somebody else to do it. Because it's just like you sit there and stroke somebody's ego like that and say, you should probably don't even have to say, make sure they're doing well. It's just like, oh, I already know you're gonna do it. Never said anything, and then probably does it. So
well, I think most of these tactics could probably stop all the wars we fought in our world.
absolutely.
Because it's to your point, you can stroke someone's ego and still achieve what you want to achieve.
Mm.
You just have to know how to manipulate the situation.
Put them in charge of that problem that you have with them.
Oh man.
Right. And then the next chapter goes on, make fault seem easy to correct. So when somebody does mess something up, you know, make it not that big of a deal. Again, if we're going to relate it to kids, a kid knocks a glass off the counter, right? Like we go through more glasses in my house because my kids think it's okay to break them. Like no one values a glass, I guess, because we just made it so nonchalant if they did. But to me, making those type of, oh my gosh, you know, fessing up to those type of small things makes fessing up to the larger things easy. And I think it makes people less scared to make mistakes, to actually try, right? Because that's the only way you're going to get anywhere is if you try. And
Right.
the more you try, the more mistakes you're going to make.
Right. This one's easier when you can kind of relate to the other person too. Like for instance, for me, for work, there are certain tasks that I know can get very overwhelming pretty quickly. So sometimes I kind of know, like, okay, well, somebody might be overwhelmed here, so it's pretty easy to kind of, you know, something's kind of happened, but doesn't really, you know, I don't know. It's just kind of easy to have it with that perspective of like, I've made this mistake before, and it's not easy, but it'd be easier if there was just someone that said, hey, this is how you do it.
Make people feel glad to do what you want. Tell someone they are important. Always make the other person happy. And he goes in about the example about the kid that did not like picking up the pears, right? So he gave him an incentive. If you pick up the pears, for every bushel you pick, I'll give you $1. But for every pear you leave on the ground, I'm taking away $1. The kid at that point was happy. The money motivated him. He found what drove him to want to do a good job. And I think that in the position that we are all trying to sit in, and this is what I'll leave you guys to kind of chat on the last few seconds, in the position that we are all sitting in, like we all want to run a business, right? How amazing would our businesses be if this is how we managed and every employee actually wanted to do their job?
And that's a good point, because that's who serves your client. If you don't, right, you want them to feel good, be good, everything in between.
Yeah, it definitely feels like a fantasy world of rainbows and butterflies, and everyone wanted to do their job. Yeah, that would be amazing.
I think it would be amazing, and I think it's actually attainable and achievable. And I think what's really cool, at least for you and I, Natalie, is we have people like Kyle Wissu who have actually done this at a super high level, literally at our fingertips. We can pick up the phone and call and say, hey, how did you do X, Y, Z? So I will make sure my husband sends out the next book. And Natalie, keep us posted. I know you're getting close, but you're going to read, you're going to stay on top of it. Trust me, do it for yourself. You will be glad you took that time for yourself. And I will see you guys next Tuesday. Peace.
Peace.